The desert spoke, and Ranger Mike Donovan regretted hearing it. The White Sands of New Mexico is a place where reality is distorted. On the 17th of March 1991, Michael Donovan was making his rounds in the southern sector of the park. The thermometer read plus 35 degrees C, but in a few hours the temperature would drop to near zero, such is the merciless nature of the desert. Mike was no ordinary ranger. Until 1990, Sergeant Donovan had served in intelligence at White Sands Missile Range, just a few miles from the National Monument. Tall, wiry, with burned-out hair and perpetually squinting eyes, he seemed part of the wilderness. His transition from the Army to the National Park Service was no accident. During the last operation in the Persian Gulf, Donovan's squad had been exposed to a strange signal. 3 soldiers died of cerebral hemorrhage, and 5 others, including Mike, suffered weeks of excruciating headaches and hallucinations. The official investigation blamed the incident on unknown chemical exposure, but Donovan felt it was a lie. When he was offered an early retirement with a pension and a recommendation for civilian service, he chose a place as close to his former base as possible. He didn't know whether it was a desire to escape his past or to stay close to it, to solve the mystery of his comrades' deaths. The Park Service valued his experience surviving in extreme conditions. In 10 months, Donovan had rescued 7 lost hikers and become one of the most respected rangers. But that night in March, everything changed. As he rounded Devil's Pool, a deep basin between the dunes, Mike noticed a strange glow over the horizon. The walkie-talkie on his belt suddenly came to life, filled with noise that was filled with scraps of words. And then a shadow flickered, quick and blurred, leaving no trace on the white sand. Donovan did not believe in ghosts. He'd seen enough mirages in his years in the desert to know that the hot air played strange tricks on perception. But what happened next didn't fit into any rational explanation. The radio crackled again, and through the interference, he heard a familiar signal, the same one that had killed his comrades in the Persian Gulf, a signal that could not have come about by accident, a signal that someone was deliberately broadcasting in the desert. That night, Mike did not yet know that this was only the beginning of a path that would link his past to the strange disappearances in White Sands and lead to something that cost him his life. The morning of the 18th of April, 1991 was windless. Mike Donovan checked his gear: radio, first aid kit, water, compass, GPS, and map. High levels of UV radiation promised to fry anyone who neglected protection, another desert hazard underestimated by hikers. Mike's route covered the western part of the park, closest to the military base. After the strange signal in March, Donovan had deliberately changed his schedule to check this section more often. The walkie-talkie came to life with Sarah's voice. The couple, Brad and Linda Carson, hadn't returned from their walk. Their car had been left in the car park at the west entrance, exactly where Mike was headed. Coincidence? He no longer believed in coincidences. Sarah had also mentioned a guy with a camera who called himself an enthusiastic paranormal researcher. Mike mentally groaned. Brad and Linda, 29-year-old Albuquerque residents, checked in for a 2-hour hike on the Cactus Loop, but did not return. No credit cards were used. Phones were silent. A standard case of getting lost. If it weren't for one detail, this route was well marked. It's virtually impossible to get lost there. In the car park near a Toyota with New Mexico plates, a young red-haired guy in a Hunters of the Unknown t-shirt was filming the scene. When he saw the ranger, he perked up. Mike ignored the camera, noting that the guy's fair skin, studded with freckles, was clearly not used to the desert sun. Donovan demanded that the camera be put down. It was interfering with the investigation. The guy introduced himself as Jason Parker, a freelance journalist writing for a small circulation paranormal magazine. Instead of hearing theories about UFOs and singing dunes, Mike asked if he'd checked out the local motels. Jason was embarrassed. He hadn't thought of that. The search began at noon. Mike was joined by 2 co-workers, 3 volunteers, and Jason, who promised to stay on camera and help. He reported that he had called motels within a 70-mile radius. No sign of the missing. The group split up. Mike chose the western sector with Jason. He wanted to test the theory about the signal, and the guy's enthusiasm could come in handy. By 4 o'clock, they had found a bottle of water with traces of lipstick matching Linda Carson's shade. The odd thing about the find was that it was half a mile off the trail. Jason surmised that the hikers had seen something unusual and decided to check it out. Donovan remained silent, but mentally agreed. They followed the barely visible tracks leading west toward the border with the military territory. At sunset, the radios crackled. They found a woman's rucksack, but no sign of the men themselves. The search was called off until morning. By then, Mike and Jason were a mile and a half off the trail, almost at the base fence. Parker asked if the phones could be traced. The ranger explained, "There's no coverage here, too much interference from equipment, or was it something else?" Seeing Jason off, Donovan handed him a business card. The guy was supposed to report unusual occurrences directly: strange sounds in the radios, interference in the electronics, an unusual glow over the west side of the park. Jason enthusiastically declared that he knew it. The ranger believes it. Mike retorted that he didn't believe but was gathering information, and advised him to learn to distinguish fact from fantasy. 2 weeks of searching have yielded no results. Helicopters, dogs, dozens of people, nothing. The Carson couple seemed to vanish. On the 5th of May, Jason called. At Dorothy's Diner in Alamogordo, he handed Mike a cassette player with headphones. At night, while gathering material for his article on the South Observation Deck, his audio recorder picked up a strange signal. Mike put on the headphones. After a silence with the background rustle of sand, he heard a familiar pulsing low-frequency signal, the same one from the Gulf. Jason asked in a whisper, was it a code or an alien signal? Mike's face petrified. Military experimental signal, highly classified. How did it end up in the park? Donovan took the tape back, warning that publishing the recording would only scare off the perpetrators. When Parker suggested installing additional recorders, Mike stopped him. It was too dangerous to attract attention. That evening, Mike studied the tape, checking the frequency and rhythm against the notes in his military notebook. The same signal had sounded before the deaths of his comrades from brain hemorrhage. The official version of a chemical attack didn't agree with the symptoms. Just a throbbing sound followed by unbearable pain, as if the brain was boiling from the inside out. Now that signal was sounding in the park, and people were disappearing. The next day, Mike re-examined the site where the bottle had been found. After several hours of searching, he found barely discernible military-style tire tracks. Someone from the base was sneaking into the park. Donovan compiled a detailed report for his superiors, recommending that the FBI be involved. 3 days later, Director Higgins called him in. The report was turned over to the military according to protocol. The command categorically denied involvement in the incidents and demanded an end to the unauthorized investigation. Receiving a direct order, Mike outwardly agreed, but the decision had already been made. Too many coincidences, too many questions. If no one was looking for the truth, he would find it himself. At home, Donovan hid the tape and notes in a hiding place behind the heating radiator, a habit from his intelligence days. He vowed to return to the investigation when he had more power or evidence. The Carson case added to the list of White Sands mysteries, but Mike knew it was only the beginning. On the 12th of March 1994, Mike Donovan was promoted to Chief Ranger of White Sands. 3 years of hard work brought promotion and long-awaited autonomy. He now controlled the western sector of the park and could shape work schedules. None of his colleagues knew the promotion was part of his plan. For 3 years, Mike had methodically collected information on disappearances, military activity, and strange signals stored in a stash behind the battery. Now, it was time to act. On the 21st of March, geology students from Las Cruces College were reported missing. Samantha Reed and Michael Chang went to collect mineral samples and never returned. Their pickup truck was found in a remote car park 3 miles from the point where the Carson couple disappeared. Mike personally led the search. Everything pointed to a normal research excursion, but backpacks with personal belongings were left in the car. The students obviously planned to return. 6 days of searching yielded only one find: Samantha's broken voice recorder. On the surviving recording, an agitated voice could be heard saying, "There's a strange vibration. Mike, can you feel it? Too loud. Head." Then static and silence. With the search officially over, Donovan discreetly returned to the location of the find. After spending the day searching, at sunset he spotted what he was looking for. Barely discernible tire tracks identical to those found in 1991. At the end of March, Mike found Jason Parker at a technology expo in Albuquerque. He'd changed from his boyish angularity to a more confident one. He was talking to a representative of Radio West, taking notes. Jason held out his business card. "Technical columnist, Modern Electronics magazine." "I grew out of the paranormal," he explained quietly. "I got a bigger job. But sometimes I think about that tape." In the cafe, Mike talked about the disappearance of the students and the similarities to the Carson case. Jason asked precise technical questions about frequencies and signal characteristics. "There is new equipment," said the journalist. "Digital recorders with extended range, miniature field detectors. I can get it through the editorial office, like for review." His eyes lit up with the same old enthusiasm, but now he had knowledge and experience behind him. In April, camouflaged observation posts with motion sensors and microphones appeared in the western section of White Sands. Mike set them up with Jason's help near the sites of past disappearances. On the 19th of May, the first trap went off, picking up a low-frequency signal. Analyzing the recording revealed a familiar pulsing rhythm, but with modified parameters. "They modified the frequency," Jason said. "They made it lower, almost infrasound-like. The human can't hear it, but the brain does. Such frequencies affect the psyche." Mike remembered the headaches and disorientation he'd experienced before his comrades died. Low-frequency waves could cause panic, confusion, hallucinations. The perfect way to control human behavior in the desert. The question remained, why? On the 14th of June, in a roadside bar, Mike met David Cerner, a former colleague from the intelligence company, by chance. After a few beers, he told about strange experiments in an isolated part of the White Sands base. Separate bunkers, heavy security, specialists in civilian clothes. "You've heard of the Echo program? Officially, it's a non-lethal acoustic weapon. Unofficially, it's something more serious. They say that they've learned how to focus sound waves so they only affect a certain area." When Mike asked about the missing ones, Cerner got serious. "Stay out of it. Rumor has it that for the final test they need test subjects. No ID, no trace." At the mention of the Gulf signal, David stopped talking abruptly and soon left, saying, "Forget it, Mike. Seriously." In the summer of 1994, Mike noticed strange animal behavior in the western part of the park. Coyotes were leaving familiar territories, rodents were disappearing from entire neighborhoods. Sensor data showed, wherever a low-frequency signal was detected, local fauna soon disappeared. In July, Jason added a mini camera with an infrared sensor to one of the devices. On the 27th of July, it recorded an unmarked military all-terrain vehicle traveling at night with its headlights off. It was unloading equipment that looked like acoustic emitters. By September, they had a solid database indicating systematic, illegal testing of military equipment in the park. Mike considered going to the FBI, but Jason suggested getting more hard evidence first. On the 25th of October, the key minicam stopped working. Mike discovered that the device had disappeared along with the camouflage. That same evening, Jason reported surveillance. A black sedan drove past his house twice. On the 3rd of November, Mike found an envelope with photos in his mailbox. They showed him entering the park building, having lunch with Jason, setting up the surveillance device. The pictures were accompanied by a note, "Stop before it's too late." On the 17th of November, when Donovan returned home, he found evidence of a break-in. All of the investigation materials, records, hard drive, floppy disks, were gone. Valuables were still intact. The burglars didn't know about his army habit. The stash behind the battery kept the most important materials: the original cassette tape, digital copies of the recordings, and an activity map. Jason's flat had been searched too, but he too had saved backups. The message was clear. Someone powerful was trying to stop them. Mike decided to back off temporarily, pretend the threats had worked. Winter was ahead, time to analyze the data and plan the next step. In the meantime, 2 more missing persons records appeared in the National Parks database. Hiker photographers who had disappeared in mid-October in the same western part of White Sands. The coincidences were becoming too many. On the 7th of February 1997, Mike Donovan received a letter with no return address. Inside was a sheet with GPS coordinates and the date 19.03.19970. Someone had set up a meeting in the desert. The winter had been unusually cold for New Mexico. White Sands was empty due to intermittent storms, giving Mike time to rebuild his surveillance network. After the 1994 break-in, he pretended to stop investigating, but only changed tactics. Jason now worked for a technology publication in San Francisco and had access to advanced equipment. Every few months, he sent Mike parcels containing miniature recorders and detectors. In 2 years, they've gathered irrefutable evidence: recordings of signals, night photos of military vehicles, intercepted conversations, but most importantly, a map where the points of disappearance coincided with the locations of the signals. 8 people disappeared in White Sands between 1991 and 1997, all in the western part within a 3-mile radius of the military base. At 5:30 a.m. on the 19th of March, the thermometer read -3 degrees Celsius. Mike left the Jeep and walked the last few miles, realizing he was walking, possibly into a trap. The coordinates led to a rocky depression between the dunes. A man with a gray military haircut and a straight posture was waiting there. Colonel Hart, Mike's former commander. He looked aged, deep wrinkles furrowing his face. Hart silently handed Mike a thin folder, noting that he couldn't give more, but it should be enough. Inside were photographs of the underground bunker, classified documents, and a schematic of the acoustic directional projector device. The colonel explained that it was part of the Echo program, a development that had begun as a non-lethal weapon. The sound waves were supposed to cause temporary disorientation, but researchers have found that the effect is amplified when the parameters are changed. Headaches turned to hemorrhages and disorientation turned to complete subjugation. Mike realized that the Gulf incident had not been an accident. Hart confirmed. It had been a field test that had ended unsuccessfully, but the project seemed too promising to shut down. When asked why he had allowed the trials to continue after the deaths of their comrades, Hart chuckled bitterly. He had tried to stop the project, but he had been demoted and had been forced to accept it. However, when the trials were moved to White Sands and started using civilians, he couldn't stay away. Mike thought there were 8 people missing, but Hart corrected him. 16. Half of the cases had been covered up. This was no longer just testing, but human experimentation. Looking through the documents, Mike saw data on the effects of low-frequency waves on the brain, reports on volunteers, and photos of people with electrodes, among whom he recognized the missing tourists. Hart said the project leader, Colonel Adams, convinced the government of the technology's importance to national security. They were creating a weapon capable of depriving humans of their will, for example, forcing enemy soldiers to turn their weapons against their own. When Mike asked about the reason for the visit, Hart told of the final, largest test planned for Sandstorm in 72 hours. The Weather Service was predicting the storm for the 22nd of March. Mike called Jason, who immediately flew in from San Francisco. At the Alamogordo Motel, they reviewed Hart's paperwork. Jason confirmed his earlier assumptions about directional acoustic effects, frequencies inaccessible to human hearing but affecting brain activity. They decided to stop the trial and rescue the prisoners. After receiving information from Hart, Mike did not act alone. Together with Jason, they approached FBI Special Agent Thomas Clark, to whom they gave some of the materials they had collected. Clark, who was in charge of the missing persons investigation, quickly assessed the seriousness of the situation. 48 hours before the storm, a covert operation was organized. The FBI could not act officially without the approval of higher authorities, but Clark assembled a small, trusted group of agents willing to participate unofficially. On the 22nd of March, as the storm peaked, The combined group approached the bunker from two directions. Detectors picked up an echo signal. The guards, reduced due to weather conditions to two posts, were neutralized by FBI agents. In the central laboratory, they found Colonel Adams and three technicians controlling a massive acoustic projector. The appearance of armed agents with FBI credentials left the military no choice. The lab was taken under control without a single shot being fired. According to the bunker plan Jason had found, the team found 6 prisoners in the East Wing, including the Carson couple, the project's first victims. Clark ordered the victims evacuated and all documentation collected. The Echo's timer showed 7 minutes to activation. While the agents brought people out, Mike and Jason copied data from the computers for evidence. At Clark's insistence, the projector was only deactivated, not destroyed. It was valuable as physical evidence. As the group with the freed prisoners made their way outside, the storm began to subside. Additional FBI forces and several Army jeeps arrived at the bunker. Colonel Hart, accompanied by a high-ranking Justice Department official, emerged from the first vehicle. Colonel Adams and his staff were officially detained. Hart explained to Mike that while the group was releasing the prisoners, he had presented final evidence to Senator Wilson and the Attorney General. The Echo program was officially shut down by a higher order 2 hours before the operation. Federal agents took Adams and the documents. Those rescued were turned over to paramedics. Mike was temporarily detained, but 3 days later all charges were dropped in the interest of national security. The official report called the incident a training accident. The missing and recovered people were silenced. The truth remained buried beneath the white sand, like so many other desert mysteries, but Mike Donovan realized that even one man can stand up to the system if he is prepared to risk everything for the truth. The temperature in White Sands had reached plus 42 degrees C, but Mike Donovan was no longer measuring it with his thermometer. He had left the Ranger Service 4 years ago with an honorable discharge and a modest but adequate pension. There has been no official acknowledgement of his role in the Echo case. The Ministry of Defense denied the existence of the project, and documents about the rescue operation were classified. Colonel Adams quietly disappeared from the public eye, presumably serving time in one of the maximum security federal prisons. The rescued captives, having undergone extensive rehabilitation, have returned to normal life. Brad and Linda Carson moved to Alaska, as far away from the wilderness as possible. They never spoke publicly about their experiences, bound by a non-disclosure agreement signed in exchange for generous compensation. Colonel Hart resigned a month after the incident. In rare conversations with Mike, he mentioned that the decision to shut down Echo had not been easy for the government. The prospect of a mind control weapon was too tempting. Perhaps somewhere development was continuing under a different name. Jason Parker had turned his journalism experience into a successful career. He was now head of the technology department of a major news agency in New York City. Once a year, he sent Mike a postcard with the words, "Some secrets are worth leaving in the sands." Mike himself settled into a small house on the outskirts of Alamogordo, 30 miles from White Sands. Sometimes, on particularly clear nights, he would take an old pair of Army binoculars and gaze up at the shimmering white dunes. They still held their secrets, but no longer for him. There are new threats in the world, new secret projects, and new heroes ready to confront them. And former Ranger Mike Donovan has finally found what he's been looking for: peace. Friends, you've just heard the story of the secrets of White Sands and the ranger who confronted a secret government project. But think about it. Is Project Echo really completely shut down? Or are similar experiments continuing in other remote corners of U.S. national parks? What happened to the other missing people who were never found? If the story touched you as much as it did me, support the channel by liking and subscribing. In the next episodes, we will dive into other mysteries of American reserves. Write in the comments whether you believe in the existence of such secret projects. See you in the next issue